Hi everyone, I'm Max and I'm from Common Sense Machines. I am going to try and show you today a bit about how to use AI to do generative world building in Decentraland and other game engines. So before we get started, I guess key thing to highlight today is the day is really about showing you how to create 3D assets really quickly within a consistent art style to build out ideas and get into your flow state much more than it is to create sophisticated game loops or kind of intricate game mechanics. By way of background, I'm not a 3D artist. I've spent the last few years at Unity. I used to be a top 40 artist a long time ago in the music world. But really my goal here is to show you how to build out ideas really quickly, get a handle on how to use these tools, what they work for and what they don't work for. And I've taken the time to really today take examples of clues and concepts that won't work as well as ones that will, so that you get an understanding of where the boundaries are. I'm going to focus predominantly on creating assets from scratch with a kind of fun, strange little concept I've got around creating hybrid animals and vegetables and fruit and things. So for example, if you could combine a bear and a cucumber, you get a cucumber bear and that sort of thing. So we're going to do a bunch of weird assets that sit in that sort of world, and I'll show you how we can create assets like that using some workflows alongside ChatGPT, and dive in and show you how to make the best of it. So that's what we're going to focus on today. There is a bunch of other high-level things we can talk about with respect to world building on a greater level. There are companies like World Labs who, for example, are building these kinds of worlds that are more kind of Gaussian splat and nerf generated, where you're generating kind of entire environments. There's also Google Genie, which you might have heard of, which is DeepMind's new project where you essentially take a photo prompt and that will eventually become a 3D dynamic world. Now, what you don't get with those worlds is interactive assets in quite the same way, and that's where we really come in. And that's kind of what I'd like to just focus on really quickly before we jump in about who we are at Common Sense Machines. So we are effectively a 3D generative AI tools company. So we enable you to take a 2D image and create a 3D asset on the back of it. We have been chosen by Unity as the only 3D AI partner that's going to be integrating into the engine later this year or early next year, which is going to be really exciting. We've been rated as the #1 3D AI model for most of 2025 on Hugging Face, which is the largest machine learning and AI benchmarking platform. We have about 500,000 people using our tools, and you can see the progression over the last year or so has been pretty staggering. I actually remember last year still thinking that these assets were really good. So we're really excited now to kind of see how much the technology has come on. I think a key thing to bear in mind with the session we'll do in a minute is that these tools are really good for some things and not for others. For those of you that are already using AI tools elsewhere, you'll find that if you try and expect it to be perfect for everything, you're going to be wildly disappointed. And I'd say that prompting, the way that you prompt, is the massive part of the art and the skill of using these tools well. And that's probably the main thing I'll try and show you today. So simple props, simple assets like this hammer, this boot, etc., will work fairly well. If you try and just take one prompt and you try and put in a complex character or an intricate scene, you're probably going to get not fantastic results. Also, things like transparent objects, the textures don't work properly. Also, anything with kind of intricate symmetry tends to fall down as well. The way that we work is that we have a tool to break assets down into parts, which can help you get much better quality results. For today, we're actually not going to do any of that. We're going to focus on really comparatively simple workflows just to try and get things up and running. But for those of you that work at gaming studios or more professional 3D modeling, then the parts-based workflows we have can take assets to much closer to production level. But today we're mostly focusing on comparatively low poly assets and getting the ball running quickly. To give you an example of the kind of work that where our tools really shine is if you were to take a concept image like this, we can then take that and then create each of those assets independently and create an environment that looks like that within the space of a couple of hours. And that's what we think is really exciting and one of the reasons we want to do this session today. And there's a walkthrough of how to create this guide. There's an Unreal project which you'll be able to download after this workshop as well for those of you that use those tools as well. Just to give you one or two instances of the other things that we are kind of focused on is creating really high quality assets that are broken down to parts and also having low poly workflows. So having a retopology tool which can break these assets down and ultimately optimize the poly count significantly. So what we find is that by breaking these assets down, you can separate the glasses, you can separate the hat and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of additional things that you can do with the tools. Today, as I said, going to keep it comparatively simple. We are also launching Cube 4.0 this week, which is going to be really exciting. I really want to show the new texture model, which I'll show in a second, which can do text and logos and writing. We have some new retopology tools, but also having a new asset pack generator, which would allow me to, for example, say, here is a stylized tree, create me 10 mushrooms in the style of this tree, and then you would create all the mushrooms automatically. I'd really hope to have that for today, but it'll be ready in the next week or so. As well as parts-based control for 3D workflows and 3D printing. So if you like any of the images or the assets that you see today, you could 3D print them. Good Christmas presents, always fun and games. So those are some of the key things. This is the new texture model, which we think is very exciting, which should be live in the next couple of days, which can ultimately replicate text. And this has been one of the things that's where 3D AI models have been really struggling. So this is a bit of background about the kind of things that we do. Key things for today, we're going to focus purely on baked texture models, so without PBR, the kind of reflections and lightings. We're going to be comparatively low poly, so less than 40k. We're not going to be doing too much on characters, although I have kind of strayed into that because it's a bit more fun. We're not going to be covering the broad extent of everything you could do in 3D world building, so skyboxes and lighting and like scenery and hills and mountains and all that sort of thing. I've really focused today on the fun stuff, which is the art stuff, because this is Art Week. So with that, let's jump straight in. Okay, so as with all good ideas these days, it's good to start with ChatGPT. So I had this idea of if you have a cucumber and a bear, or a mango and a gorilla, you could have a man-gorilla, right? So kind of silly, funny idea here. So here's my original attempt at a man-gorilla. And I got this prompt. Oh, actually, this is an orangutangerine, actually. Where I've got this prompt. Now, typically, what I will do is if I come up with an idea like that, I will go to ChatGPT and say, I want to create some prompts and do this, etc., and do this sort of things. I want to create a whole bunch of ridiculous ideas. Border cauliflower cheese, actually, we might make at some point as well. But it will give me a big bunch of ideas, and then I will ask ChatGPT to help me write the prompts better. Actually, I wasn't happy with all of these. We'll go through some of these in a little bit more detail, but asking ChatGPT to then write you the better prompts. So a low poly model actually ended up changing it from low poly to mobile gaming 3D, because low poly was a bit too low poly. But then you can get some really, really fun results. So I think the low poly model was like that, which wasn't quite right for what we were looking for here. A personal favorite, Hippotato, quite fun. Now, the thing that you'll find is that because this has got lighting on here, I was originally going to try and change the lighting, because when you bake lighting, you're going to end up with a lot of white shadow on the top of his head. But showing him in a different angle will sometimes get you better results. So assuming that we get that image, the way that we would then create a 3D model would be to go to image to 3D. And then you have a few settings over here. We're going to be creating a single model rather than a kit. A kit will break it down into multiple different assets. I'll show you how to use that a little bit later. I would be using the parts and auto assembly model, and most of the time, if you're not working Decentraland, I would suggest you use that. But as we're keeping things under 40 poly, we will start here. We're going to be using baked textures as opposed to PBR, but you can also do baked PBR textures. Also, if you want high resolution, if you're doing 3D printing or you're doing high AAA gaming, then that's the kind of thing you might go for. Auto moving background, I typically suggest doing 3 variations, because you'll generally get a better result, because sometimes if you just do one, it won't quite work. And then you generate a 3D mesh, and it will cost you, so it'll take you about 3-ish to 5 minutes. Also, by just a general rule, the cost per generation is around 20 cents, between 20 cents and 40 cents, depending on what the settings are. And actually, one point which I perhaps didn't mention in the original piece is that all of our models are trained on our own data sets. We do leverage open source tools to various extents on various parts of these workflows as well, but we train and manage all of our own data sets, and therefore are copyright safe. And my job at Unity in the last few months there was acquiring data for them for models that were looking to do something similar to what we're doing here. Okay, so let's jump into creating some fun ideas. Where we got to here was me looking to get ChatGPT to create a big bunch of these different prompts. So at this point, for example, let's go for pumpkin cat. That's quite fun. So we'll go here, we'll go image to 3D. In fact, we'll go chat to 3D because this is where you can really do the most fun. Chuck that in, and then that will create a new image quite quickly. What we tend to find, okay, how are we going? So pump cat, so that's not, okay, so that's low poly, for example. Now, well, that isn't actually going to give us the best results. Let's try again, but let's make it a mobile gaming 3D stylized model of a pumpkin cat, sort of geometrical vibe. Do we like that? Yeah, we'll go with that. And granted, at the moment, I'm just getting some ideas together, populating these. This is kind of halfway between furniture and characters, so he's a bit too much of a character. I think maybe I want Pump Cat to be more like a. Maybe let's make it more like a sofa, maybe a pumpkin sofa, Pump Cat sofa. Yeah, let's go for a Pump Cat sofa. But he's a sofa. All right, let's see how that goes. And then once we've got that sofa, we can then turn into a 3D model, and I'll show you some different ways of doing that. Okay, so that's quite fun. What might not work so well is that you've got the lighting coming out the back, because we're not going to be doing lighting in this session. That won't work. If you have these intricate patterns like this, you can sometimes get some smudged textures, but I think this is good enough to get going with. We'll take that forward, go to image to 3D, use the similar sorts of settings that we were going with there. We'll go bake textures, keep poly count under 40K, and we'll generate 3D mesh, and that'll give us a few different, and that'll give us an example. So we'll wait for that to get going, and let's take you down to some of the ones that I made initially. So this guy from this image, we've got 3 different variations. You can see that the eyes often don't work perfectly, but if you do 3 variations, one will be slightly better than the other. I've actually tried to animate this guy as well, so we'll see how that's worked out, because his arms are a little bit too big, so animating doesn't always work perfectly. How did the hippotato come out? Let's have a look at him. Not awful, but again, the eyes, you often lose the eyes, which is one of the problems with doing characters, but I couldn't resist doing these fun sorts of characters. And you can see, as I mentioned, this sort of baked lighting means that you've got this white lighting up here on the right-hand side, which isn't ideal. I think this was the orangutan tangerine, which I quite liked. He's, I think, come out quite well. You can see that the textures have been maintained reasonably well. He's come out much better for varying reasons. And I guess the key principle of prompting is, and I'm breaking this rule with this, is that the simpler the input that you put in, the better the results that you're going to get out. And I think when was talking earlier about using parts and creating part-based workflows in a different way to how when you work with ChatGPT, the more context you put into the prompt, the better. With 3D AI, the less information you put in, the fewer pixels it's got to use, the fewer tokens it's got to use ultimately, the better the output of the model is going to be. Now, in this instance, actually, the input was not too complicated, and therefore it's come out okay. But I've got some examples which I'll show you later where I went way too complicated, and I want to show you what the limits of those were. I think here's another one. This was a phonome, a mobile phone, a gnome fused with a smartphone. It's kind of interesting. Didn't blow me away, but I don't actually think that we even made that as a 3D model yet. So we'll give him a go. Let's see how that's going. Phonome. This was, I think, a bicycle ball. And I thought he was fun, but if you look at the chat that I went through here, I was like, he's interesting, but let's give him some sunglasses, and then he looks a bit cooler, and then you can maybe make something from that. Now, what I'd be tempted to do here, if I was really committed to the cause, would be to go image to kit, and image to kit will break him into multiple different assets. Now, you see you've got quite intricate components here, like you've got the wheel, you've got these gears and that sort of thing. And that's an example of where if you do put this just straight into the image to 3D generator, you're going to get quite smudgy results. I think that I'll see how that shakes out. What we're going to do is we're going to generate a kit, see how that shakes out. And we're going to generate a single model and see how that shakes out. And we're going to have to come back to that because the kit will probably take 5 or 10 minutes to create from scratch. But there's quite a big difference in terms of the quality that you get when you break things up like that. This was quite a fun one. An what was it? An octopus. So an oak tree / octopus. Which was quite fun. I think that's quite a nice kind of scenery, a bit of scenery that we could have there. That's generated. We've got our cucumber here. He's quite fun. Now, what we've got here when we've generated him is actually we've also generated the platform and also some of this bake lighting, which isn't ideal. So what I'd be tempted to do here, if you get a result like that, would be to go back and then you would adjust the prompt. So now we might say, show me the character without the platform, or you could say with no background, flat lighting. You might also put them in a T-pose as well for the character so that it's easier to animate. T-pose, flat lighting, maybe it's flat ambient lighting, because you don't want there to be the kind of spotlighting on his head, because that's where you're going to create this whiteness from. So we give that a go and let's see how that shakes out. And you can see here, these are the kinds of prompts that help to slightly adjust the input, which can be helpful. So sometimes if you're doing a specific prop, getting a 3/4 handle is right. You see, it hasn't quite worked out brilliantly there. It's a bit of a shame. Right, well, we'll try him again and see if that works any better. What we could do, just to maybe show you difference between PBR textures and baked textures, will show you a PBR version as well, because that will show the lighting in a slightly different way. PBR textures is ultimately, for those of you that aren't aware, this includes things like albedo maps, normal maps, metallic. So if you have, like, for example, a shiny surface or a roughness map, it's the kind of thing that gives it that really more intricate sense of realism, but it's more complex to generate from just using AI, basically. Where are we? Got way too many stupid ideas to get through here. This was a rabbit robot, which is quite fun, which we've also done some animation of. One fun thing is that when you're using 3D AI tools, I would say the general rule, mechs or mechanical or robot-based characters tend to work quite well because you don't get the uncanny valley, as we saw with the hippotato and the orangutango or whatever it was. The eyes tend to give it away, but with a robot, eyes are already dead behind the eyes, so they tend to work out a little bit better. And I think he has worked out reasonably well. Let's see if we could, where it actually was his generation. You can see him up here. Yeah, not bad at all. What I'd be tempted to do though would be to go and take away the platform so we can animate him properly. Just show him, take away the platform. And then that allows you to get the asset on its own, and then you can animate it. Because if you animate it with the platform, that's not going to work. In fact, probably take the carrot out of his hand as well if you're really committed to this, which I think we are. Maybe take the carrot out of his hand as well, and then that allows you to separate the asset independently. So let's go and see how this goes. Great. Okay, so at this point we could now go image to 3D. We're going to get him base. We're going to go bake textures. Going to go there. All right, let's keep him going. Right, let's keep cracking. So we had our cucumber here. This was I quite like this guy. This crab cake. I mean, realistically, if you say crab cake, you kind of want to have a bit more crab and cake integrated. He's come out not too badly. But again, you can see on the platform, is that really what we want? It's unsure. I mean, really, we should be talking more about what we do want. But I think at this point, we're just being playful, throwing different ideas around. This guy was a crocodile, which I quite like. Now, this was an example where I thought this was going to work out quite badly because there's a lot of intricate detail here. And therefore, you would expect that the AI was unlikely to do quite well. But the kind of generations it came out with were not awful. This one was part baked. I think this one was another parts baked one. This one was actually a lower poly one that worked out okay. That actually didn't work out too badly, but you can see that it's kind of messed up this knife there, and obviously hasn't got the clock anywhere near right either. I did actually have another go at him later. Yes, there he is. So what we could do is we could create a mesh. I'm actually tempted to take him back into Chapter 3D and put him in a T pose, and then we can animate him as well. And I'll show you how we can do that as well. So let's just get him into a T pose, get him get the 3D model of that, and then see how we can animate him. Because actually also take away his tail, because if you animate him with a tail, it's not going to work very well. So we'll wait for that, and then I'll show. Because ultimately, we want to move on to buildings. We want to move on to some other kind of props and environments beyond just these characters, which we're going to be doing a minimal amount of time. Oh, we've somehow lost his legs. This is one of the things that you will occasionally follow. I'm gonna crack on with this guy anyway because I think he's quite fun. Here we go. Let's go to bake textures and get him going. We'll go to animate him once he's ready. Okay. So we had our crab cake. Want to start to move on to chair bear. Now initially that wasn't quite what I wanted, so I had to go back in and try and then create a different prompt because sometimes it won't work exactly as you want. But then ended up with a slightly more integrated chair bear, which I liked a little bit more. That feels a bit more chair bear vibes. Now the key thing is here, right? That you're starting to see a slight divergence in art styles. Like this was a tomato tower, which I thought was quite fun, but that's obviously quite a different style. You need to be consistent in the way that you do the prompting, which is one of the reasons I was using ChatGPT to do that. You can continuously say, for example, here, create a I don't know what we're going to say, a chair bear character in this art style, and that's how you maintain a level of art styles. And I'm just creating I'm just creating lots and lots of tabs here because it's simpler for me to do that, to show you this. Whereas if you were working independently, you would probably, there you go. So you can see that that's kind of maintained the art style. And that's what we're building into this new asset pack generator that would just allow you to do that at scale much more quickly. But ultimately, that rather than training your own LoRa or training a style pack or anything like that tends to get you good enough results for these kinds of applications around like UGC and creating your own vibe games. Other things, where should we jump into? We've got the phone gnome, we've got the cow guy, got this sort of stuff. Let's keep going through. Sam, so go back to my let's go back to ChatGPT because this is where some of the other things were. We could make a few more of these. Brocodile. I actually made a brocodile tree, as in a broccoli crocodile tree, which I thought was quite fun. We'll come on to that later. Other animal hybrids. Actually, I never came around to the baboon. The balloon could be fun. We could try that. Probably quite simple, not too difficult. I could be floating around. I think plant animal hybrids. And then I think I decided I wanted a few more like food animal slash like kind of buildings and things. Would be fun to get some sort of steampunk energy in there as well. But then it started. This stuff's just a lot more cliched. You know, like a banana bench. You kind of seen this in like Cloudy the Chance of Meatballs sort of stuff. So and then you'll ask for more alliteration or more weird stuff. None of this was really blowing me away. Disco Dome, etc. So I think the key thing is then say like some of those ideas, turn them into the specific prompt that I want, so that I can literally just go. Let's go with this one. Okay, let's get Unicorn, bang, Chapter 3D, bang, and then see how that shakes out as an example. So that's just quite a kind of way of speeding up the workflow. Okay, so I wanted to do some sandwich. I think sandwich slide. This would be an example of a prompt that I would think is probably too difficult for an AI generating tool to do well without it being broken down into parts. Let's have a look at how it turned out. I think. Yeah, I think I expected that assumption would be pretty accurate. And this is when I was showing you that texture model earlier. You end up with writing and everything else getting smudged, which is always a bit of a problem. I think this one might be even worse. So yeah, so those are the kinds. That's an example of it not being quite right. The spaghetti swing would be another example where I'd expect this to be nightmare fuel. Yeah, not really usable, not great. Yeah, lighting's all wrong, bit too messy. So those are other examples. Here is our bicycle. He's actually looking pretty good, actually. Better than I'd expect. You might see, it depends how fussy you are about the wheels. I'd be inclined to break that guy down into parts, and I'll show you the difference when we do that. And we'll show you the different versions up there. This is our rabbit again. I think we saw him already with the platform. This was an alternative crab cake because I needed to do a different crab cake. And he's lovely. I think he's worked out beautifully. But again, he's got this platform. Again, you might go back into here and then say remove the platform if you want to do something nice. This was quite a nice one. A maple mousse tree, very Canadian theme. Now, this is typically the kind of style that wouldn't work particularly well with image to 3D because it's essentially like a 2D aesthetic and you would need that to be shaded for it to work well. So let's see how that's worked out. Yeah, not well. And I'd say that's a general rule. I mean, actually, it's not awful. I'd say things like foliage, complex trees is where you start to have real issues. And perhaps, it depends how fussy you are, that actually could be justifiable. But again, if I was committed to it, I'd probably be inclined to break this down into parts. So I'd then go here, and then I'd take into image to kit, take that image, and then you'd break it down into parts. So that's the kind of workflow. Image to kit to break things out. And let me show you actually what I mean by that now, because I have talked about that a couple of times. So the area that image to kit is often the most useful is if you're taking a piece of scenery. So I asked ChatGPT, based on what we've been talking about here, can you create a prompt for me that'll, where are we? So create a scene based on this that you think would be right for Decentraland, and annoyingly, it has got the art style slightly wrong. But what it will then do is it will then take that input prompt and then create 8 or so different images, 8 or so different assets from it. And you can see that actually that's not bad quality. Again, it's got that baked lighting issue a little bit, but it then will separate each of those parts by breaking them down into a separate component. And you can see there that the quality of each of those parts is really, really good. So for building scenes from scratch, it's really, really powerful. And if the way that you work is having a piece of concept art and then working from there, rather than just building things up independently like I have in this semi-chaotic way, then that could be then that's obviously a much more traditional way to work. And you can see certainly for these simple assets, it's performing like pretty well. But again, that's in a kind of low poly workflow there. Okay. One other thing I wanted to highlight. So I wanted to change the color of this crab. Now, let's imagine you get this crab here and you think, actually, I'd prefer him if he was in a different color. The simplest way to edit him at the moment would be to go here, say Chapter 3D, and say, turn him black and blue or whatever, or red and, turn him red and gold or whatever. And I did that earlier with the same said crab, got a blue version of him, and then you can do the same thing and you end up with a much very, very similar sort of output. Where are we? Other sorts of assets here. This is the other building, and I'd say that these kind of buildings with flat surfaces tend to work pretty well. Where we're starting to hit, so I'll take on to some of the nightmare fuel, the examples that I thought wouldn't work so well. So having a willow tree, for example, I think this was what was the prompt actually? It was a will owl or something. Where are we? A will owl tree. Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's a kind of cute idea, but probably on the budget side, I think, to be honest. So probably not that right. And I'd say that the foliage and those kind of things don't work too well. This was I think a penguin pine pine tree. Possibly usable, just on the edge, I think, depending on kind of where you sit, but quite fun. Is it a character? Is it a tree? Not quite sure. I had another go at the will owl tree, and again, even worse, more nightmare fuel there. So I'd say trees and those kinds of things certainly are more complex, but simple assets like Mr. Crab over here, he's doing pretty well. I quite like him. I think this is the oak octopus. That has actually worked out better than expected, because I would typically say that these leaves are the kind of things that don't work, but he's quite a fun little prop over there. And if we did want to build out more characters in this sort of art style, we could then continue on here and then say, show me a, I don't know, what were the other prompts from up here? A desk duck. So coming back to our duck desk, let's bring this guy into reality. The same again, style. Use the same settings, base, keep him under 40. If this turns into an office, corporate office, all these elements are going to be available a little bit later. Quite happy to work. I hope you're starting to see that this is a bit more fun than trawling through asset packs, basically, because you can really start to put your own personality into it. Weird little spin. Here's an example. This was a table. Cat table. Now again, this is another example where I could see it was quite a busy background, so then it said show it with no background, then you create a 3D asset from that. Similarly, what was this? A stool lemur stool, kind of interesting. Nice and simple. Probably going to get decent results from that. Here we go. Here's the cat table. Not bad at all. Lemur stool. I think we're starting to move into more furniture. I mean, that's horrendous mouth. Have any of them come out right? There we go. Maybe one too many legs, but certainly a bit more usable, a bit more fun. What was this? This might have been another. Oh yeah, this was just taking different prompts from this from that piece of concept art up there. So ultimately, by taking that image together, that is quite a quick way of getting things going. I think here was another example of this guy. So now that we've got him, I think we did him earlier, we can put him into image 3D, put him through the same process, and then we'll be able to get an animated version of him as well, hopefully. Let's get him going. You can see he's now baking up there. Where are we? Started to get into a few more buildings and things. What was this guy? I think this was a fish sofa, a sofisher. Kind of interesting, but not great. And yeah, hasn't worked out beautifully, but you kind of see the rough and the smooth with this. Where are we? This was a spider stand. I think I actually asked it to be a bit more animalistic. Here, a bit more spidery, and because he hasn't really kept the same level of artistic art style. But to be honest, this is all kind of broadly falling within the same sort of remit. Here was a carrot cat cathedral, which I quite like the idea of. Now, it is quite a complex prompt, and it has, not worked out well. Again, too complicated. This is the kind of thing that I think if you were doing game art, it would be quite useful to use our tools to help you create some a geometry base, or break it down into parts and then go from there. But I think this is too complicated in its own right. Similarly, this was an Apple Aardvark Arena. I'm going to say that's probably going to be Nightmare Fuel and not work out. It's not dreadful, but not really particularly not great. I think this was a banana bear bank. That's quite a nice ring to it, but because you've got the writing there, it's going to not work out particularly well. So if you're willing to do retexturing, then there are some retexturing tools that you can use here, which will allow you to do some changing of writing, changing it from like smudge writing like there is here to better writing, and or you can completely rechange the texture as well. So there are tools that allow you to do that. This was a lemon leopard library, kind of potentially chaotic enough. Again, anything with the writing on the top is awful. Let's come back to some of the other ones. I think this was a crocodile tree. And I'm going to rent it. That's probably way too complicated again. So this is where I was starting to get a bit nuts. I think that depends on the kind of art style. There's something kind of interesting about him. This was a different one, crocodile tree. He's almost worse. But again, give you another example. I think here, I wanted to show an example of how to create the same art style. So creating a cat in the same art style as that, you can really, really keep a significant amount of consistency there. So we think that's quite a helpful set of tools. Where are we at now? I think that we've gone through the predominant, like the main things I want to talk about. This one was quite fun. A hedgehog. There's a hedge and a hog. And I would imagine that that's kind of being quite a simple asset, going to work out fairly well. Again, you might go back to the original image and say, take out the platform, there to try and improve the quality there, to try and get him on his own. Now, assembling all of these and then putting it into a style that makes sense is the second part of this. But I want to show you the fun bit, basically, of how to get good results. Again, we've generated this guy with a tail, so he's not going to animate beautifully. However, I reckon this guy probably will animate more beautifully. He's not beautiful, is he? Unfortunately. All right, we will go AI animate, and we're going to go a couple of these different things and see how that guy shakes out. I think, did we go to the chair bear? How do we do here? That's pretty solid. That's pretty good. That's pretty usable. So I think you're starting to get a bit of a picture now. More fun than using an asset library, faster to come up with different ideas. Certainly good to embrace the level of chaos where you can come up with all these ideas quickly. But it probably took me about 40-something minutes to come up with all of these ideas, and I guess another 40 or so to sort of bring them to you guys. And for me, this has been a lot of fun. I haven't worked out what the game's actually going to be, but I guess you connect, go at that point. But we are in Art Week, so not too much pressure there. I guess some of the final points I was going to highlight are, in terms of the key lessons from this is really all about prompting and learning the best ways to do it. As I've talked about, just continuously iterating on the image prompt is the best way to do it. Starting with simple assets and not having too high expectations at the beginning is best. And if you want to continue to build on a consistent art style, depending on what's right for you, that's a good place to start. I would say don't expect complete perfection. So tweak the images where you need, again, in the 2D world. And sometimes you need multiple attempts. Sometimes it just won't work and you have to go back and do it again. And I'd say to the greatest extent that you can, do use ChatGPT. I mean, there's a whole ton of ideas that I would be very tempted to spend many more hours making stupid ideas here. Like a lamb panther was quite a fun idea. Turtle table. I mean, it's not all great, but you can sometimes pick out the good ones. So there's a lot more that you can do, but I'd stress that that's a really good way of keeping the workflow going and just getting into that flow state faster. I did want to do more buildings, but to be honest, I think we're seeing that the bigger buildings are just are less good. If you did want to be more committed to make higher quality assets, though, the image to kit tool that we have, which will break a building down, is absolutely the way to go. And maybe that would be one good thing to show. And maybe I'll just show you an example. This was the bikey cow guy over here, right? This was the cow. Unfortunately, the cow probably hasn't worked out perfectly, but you can see each of these components is now really high quality, much higher quality. Therefore, if you were doing a building similarly, you could get much higher quality. And the wheel might be too symmetrical. Pretty good, not perfectly symmetrical, but getting there. I'd say things with like a lot of symmetry is an area that you can sometimes get something slightly off. But I'd say as a general rule, that is a really good outline of how things are going. But the more complex an asset that you have, the more you're going to want to use tools like image to kit, which is up here, or when you're creating assets like that. So imagine you're going here, you're going image to kit, you'll end up with a much better result than you would if you were doing if you would just go image to just generate a single model. So that is a bit of a high level from me. Emily's going to spend a few minutes putting some of these assets together into a world. And hope that has been fun. Really looking forward to seeing what the rest of you come up with. As I said, Cube 4 is launching this week. If you would like access, if you would like some free credits,